A little over a year ago, I decided to build an urban garden on the patio of my apartment. Because I was a beginner with all of this, I decided to learn as I went along and documented as much as I could and put that here on YouTube. So if you're watching this episode and you haven't seen episode 1 through 7, then make sure you do that. The playlist is on screen right now, because so far I uploaded videos on learning how to make a garden layout, learning how to make planters, how to make a tiny greenhouse from waste material, how to compost food scraps in a small apartment, and of course sprouting seeds, raising them to a plant, and then harvesting crops and cooking with that. Wow. But before the project ends, I have a few things to catch you up on, because the last video was somewhere in the summer where I was harvesting some nasturtium plants. And up to that point, I'd only harvested that, some herbs, Swiss chard, some peas, but there was way more that I was growing in the urban garden. In July is really when most of the garden started taking off. Every morning when I went out to the garden, I would see something new. I just found the first tomato. This is the plant from the greenhouse, so it's doing very well. The tomato plants were growing at a rapid rate, so they needed to be supported. I used these little steel strings to kind of keep them upright. And very quickly I started finding green tomatoes everywhere. The flowers kept on flowering, and even the cucumber plant showed a tiny little cucumber. The male and the female flower need to cross-pollinate, and I decided to give them a helping hand, just in case. It's been raining for days, so I've been putting this off, but as you can probably tell, the potato plant has completely withered away. So I want to see if we can find some potatoes in these and then cook something with it. Oh, we can see potato right here. Hello! Oh! I was actually very surprised to see that we'd grown a handful of potatoes, so I decided to use them in that night's curry. They tasted great. We have a cucumber. Oh, wow. I think we have another one here. It's really small though. Look.
Oh my god, it's massive.
Oh. Mmm. I like it.
Yeah. Crunchy.
Very refreshing.
Yeah.
I feel like with so many things that we've tried, it's so different from what we buy in the store.
Yeah, definitely. But the carrot was spectacularly sweet.
Cute. Yeah. Okay, it's time to do some maintenance on the garden, because I've been not really doing any, and it's starting to show. Especially the salad, that has seen its best days, definitely. But I'm gonna clear out some things and move some plants. Some I want to move into the greenhouse, because I think the eggplant, I'm not sure if it's gonna flower and grow a fruit before it gets too cold. So I'm gonna transfer that to a pot so it looks nice for the rest of the summer. It actually feels so calming to do this. I've been trying to avoid doing this for the past week, but now that I'm doing it, I'm actually really enjoying it, because it's such a mindful exercise. It's actually really fun. Look at how cool this is. This is one of the old heads of the marigold flower, and if you let it dry enough, what you'll get is seeds. These are exactly the seeds that I sowed in the first few episodes, and now You can just continue to harvest these seeds. How cool is that? And just like that, the first green tomato turned red. I really couldn't stop myself from trying it there and then. First tomato from the garden. Let's see what it tastes like. But surprisingly, I'm giving you like a happy face here, but I didn't really like the taste of this. It was a bit too like grainy for my taste and not as fresh. Or maybe I'm just not used to fresh tomatoes. Now, the nasturtium plant you see here was planted as kind of a companion plant. In this case, you can harvest the seeds from them to turn into what they call poor man's capers, which I showed you in the previous video, but they're mostly planted there because they look nice and also because they attract certain pests that then leave the rest of your produce alone. And that definitely worked. There were also some crops that completely flopped. Corn is one of them. And looking back now, I can totally see why this happened. But when I started the garden and I made the plan for these planters, I thought they would be way bigger than they ended up being. So what happened was I looked at the back of the packet of the corn, saw that the rows needed 30 centimeters minimum of space between them to grow fully. And once I made the planters, I didn't really think about changing the row distance of the corn. So what I ended up doing is planting way too much corn in a small amount of space, thinking that I would still grow big ears of corn, but of course this didn't happen. And it is not just the row distance that did it. Here we can see the male part of the corn flower. These are called tassels. And each of these tassels have to land on the female part of the flower, which is called the silks. And each silk hair will turn into a corn kernel. So if the pollination doesn't happen correctly, you either end up with nothing or, in my case, with a tiny ear of corn. A similar thing happened to the eggplant. The plant grew a beautiful orange flower, but it never really did much more than that. But apparently it's quite normal that in your first year, you're just trying things out. You still have to learn so much about the quality of the soil that you have, the conditions that you have around you, and which plants grow really well and in which positions. So I'm sure that if I was still in that same location year after year, the yield and the crops and how I place the crops in the garden would have changed drastically over the years and made it a much more productive place. The tail end of the season really was all about tomatoes. All of a sudden, all of these green tomatoes turned red, and that I think is the benefit from having the sun on the garden for most of the day. Even though it did end up drying out most of the other plants, I really loved this last little tail end of my first season of growing my own food. This B-roll, I can probably fill an hour-long video with just shots of tomatoes, but I really enjoyed this. As you can see, most of the tomatoes didn't make it into the house, but that's okay, I'll just remember to plant more tomato plants next time. And with that, we've reached the end of my first growing season. Let's look back at this project and see what I've learned. So in August last year, I decided to grow my own food because I wanted to know more about what it takes to put food on the table. And it's safe to say that this project definitely did that. I didn't fully realize how much energy is needed to grow food for one person. And with energy, I mean things like how much water it needs, how much sunlight it needs, the compost, how much time you need to grow a small amount of food, which isn't even enough to feed one person. Now, the second thing that I learned about growing food, and it's gonna be a bit contradictory to what I just said, is how little energy it takes to grow food. Essentially, you just place things which are naturally around together, and that grows into food. To me, even though I know this is how food growing works in theory, seeing that in practice is amazing. And for some plants, you're even able to harvest seeds again at the end of the season, which you can then use to regrow the plants and the crops. So seeing this circle of growing food and harvesting seeds, which can then grow food, was a great thing to see up close and personal.